Hi people, it's me, Anja. My pronouns are she and her, and welcome back to my channel for my mid-year reading check-in book tag, which is a revamped version of the original mid-year book tag that Jesse from Jesse the Reader did about a month ago. So I will link his original video in the description box below. But yeah, I'm about a month late to do this video because originally I was going to do it a month ago. But then, June got really busy, and then July got really busy. And originally today, actually, I was going to make a video called Book Recommendations Inspired by Barbie, since I just watched Barbie last night. But then as I was, accumulating books, I realized that I haven't read a whole lot of books centered on, white fragility, white feminism, with white savior main characters, because the majority of the books that I read are intersectional. So with that said, instead I'm filming this video. So anyway, without any further ado, like I mentioned, Jesse's original video will be in the description box below, or maybe instead I'll link it up here. But anyway, there's that. The first question is, what's the best book that you've read this year? Of the 7 5-star books that I've read this year, I would say that my favorite one is Ruby Lost and Found. Although I don't usually rank my favorite books of the year each year, I just simply make a video about my favorite books of the year each year at the beginning of the next year, and I just talk about the books in chronological order. But I would definitely say that Ruby Lost and Found was absolutely so good. It was so iconic and amazing and emotional. I just absolutely loved it. If you didn't know, it's a middle-grade contemporary. Why did I almost say fantasy? It's definitely not a fantasy. It's a middle-grade contemporary following a Chinese-American main character, if I'm not mistaken. And it's set in modern day, and it basically, she's spending the summer with her grandmother the year after her grandfather died. And it's so good. It's so emotional, and I love, the grief and love and loss that's portrayed in it. It's so good. I absolutely loved it so much. I found myself becoming so lost, no pun intended, in it so quickly from the beginning to the end. The author is unbelievably talented. I'm so excited for her YA debut, which I believe comes out next year or something like that. I'm not completely sure. But anyway, definitely Ruby Lost and Found. It was so good. So anyway, the next question is, most disappointing book that you've read this year? I would say, honestly, of the majority of the books that I've read this year, and I've read 234 books this year, if you didn't know, I would say the books that disappointed me the most, it's hard for me to pin down, I would say, because most of the time, these days, when I start a book, the book ends up being what I expected it to be, if that makes any sense. But within that, there have been a few books that I had higher expectations for that didn't meet the mark or miss the mark. You know what I mean? The first one I would say is My Dear Henry, which is a book that I read in, I think, March. It was on my March TBR. Basically, it's a YA gothic retelling of Jekyll and Hyde. The main character is black and gay. I don't remember specifically what I disliked about it. I think it's more so rooted in the fact that I didn't know what was going to happen next, which is typically a good thing and is usually full of surprises or whatever. But in this one, I had no memory or knowledge of the original tale at all. So I wish that I had knowledge so that I would have known how gothic it was going to be and slow burn and everything. I don't remember specifically what I disliked. But anyway, that's definitely one of them. Another one I would say, I'm looking down at my notebook, by the way, where I have the questions. But anyway, another one I would say is You Don't Have a Shot, which I read in May, and it was a YA sapphic contemporary. It's written by the same author of Ophelia After All, which is why I had really high expectations for it. But overall, I just didn't like this book as much as Ophelia After All. I don't remember why. I didn't feel fully connected to the characters or the romance, but I understand why other people like it objectively, if that makes any sense. So that's another one that for me was more disappointing than anything else. Another one I would say was Bitterthorn, which I was really excited for again. I think this book I read, I think in May. I'm not completely sure. This book is a YA sapphic gothic fantasy, and I think that this book cemented for me is that I don't love gothic books because overall, usually I don't enjoy how slow they are, which really says a lot for me because I'm a fast reader. Because typically when people complain that a book is slow, I don't take that into consideration because I think to myself that I'm such a fast reader. But obviously I read faster than like the normal person or whatever on average, so typically that doesn't bother me. But in this book it did, and also I wasn't hooked completely by a lot of the other elements within the story, so there's that. Another book that disappointed me more recently was My Week with Him. I didn't like this book that much because, okay, first of all, sorry, it's a YA contemporary, and it's on my July TBR, so I talked about it pretty recently. I almost tried to say frequently, but anyway, this book is a YA black contemporary, and I had really high expectations for it, and it follows a girl over spring break as she stays with her best friend because her mom kicked her out of the house. So for me, I was kind of hoping that storyline about the relationship with her mom should have been the forefront, but like this story was more romance driven than I was expecting. So it's kind of my least favorite by this author. I don't know why I said kind of. It definitely is my least favorite by this author, for sure. So yeah, I took so long answering that question, but basically those are my top 4 most disappointing books of the year. So anyway, the next question is a pretty easy answer, and the question is best book recommendation you've received this year, and it's definitely Divine Rivals. I love this book so much. It's this like upper YA historical fantasy, and I loved it so much. I love the characters, I love the romance, I love everything about it. The friend that recommended this book to me also recommended The Cartographers, which I read last year, which is another iconic, amazing book. It's so good. Like, oh my gosh. Anyway, it's so hot out today. But anyway, the point is, like, Divine Rivals is so good. I'm so excited to read the sequel. I think the sequel either comes out at the end of this year or early next year. Like, it either comes out December 26th or January 4th. I'm not completely sure, but I'm so excited to read it because Divine Rivals was so good. So thank you so much to my friend Robin who recommended this book to me, and I will link her book blog in the description box below in case you want some more like gothic dark academia book recommendations. So anyway, the 4th question is, what was the first DNF of the year? I don't remember. I'll be honest, I don't remember at all. I DNF books literally all the time. I would say that I DNF books almost as often as I actually finish and complete books. So I have no idea. The next question is, what's a new release from the year and your thoughts on said book? I've read so many new releases this year. I'll be honest. I think last year I calculated that 70% of the books that I read, of the 450 books that I read last year, were new releases. So yeah, I've read a great deal of new releases this year, for sure. I don't know how many specifically, but probably a lot. So skipping on ahead to the next question, what's a book from the first half of the year that you still want to read, and what's a book that you're anticipated for the second half of the year? So answering this question in 2 parts. The first part of the question is, what's a book from the first half of the year that you want to read? I know this right off the bat. Jamie. This is a middle grade contemporary, and it's written by the same author of the Strange Worlds Travel Agency trilogy, which I loved, like, so much. This book came out in March, if I'm not mistaken, but I haven't read it yet because I don't think it's been published yet in America. If I'm not mistaken, the author is British, so the books have been published, like, across the pond, but not here yet, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember when I read the other trilogy, like if I read them when they were published here or when they were published in the UK. You know what I mean? Anyway, I can't find this book anywhere, which truly says a lot because I use my local libraries, I use, other black market libraries or whatever the fuck. So if you know, you know. So basically, I can't find this book anywhere, but I would really love to read it. It sounds so good. I think I talked about it in one of my monthly TBRs in the first quarter of the year, but I can't quite remember because I think initially I thought it was going to be coming out in April, but then it came out in March instead, but I had already filmed my March TBR, so I didn't include it then, but I can't remember if I included it in April too. Anyway, I'm so excited to read it. I don't know when I'm going to do that, but hopefully this year. Anyway, the second part of that question is, what's the book that you're anticipating for the second half of the year? I would say I have a couple for this one as well. One of them is Never a Hero. By the way, I'm sorry for the shaky cam. But anyway, I typically don't film videos in one sitting, as you know. But anyway, Never a Hero is a YA historical fantasy time travel sequel to Only a Monster, which was one of my almost favorite books last year. So I'm so excited to read this book. It comes out next month, I think. I mean, I know for sure it comes out in August. I just don't remember when specifically it comes out in August. But I will be talking about it in my August TBR, which I will be filming soon, probably. Also, sorry for the cicadas. They're just happy today, I guess. Anyway, Never a Hero sounds amazing. Another book that I'm really excited for is called The Otherwoods, which is a middle-grade contemporary or urban fantasy. I don't know, it's queer. It's written by the same author who wrote Bianca Torre is Afraid of Everything, which I really enjoyed whenever I read that earlier this year. It was so good. So I'm so excited to read that book. It has a really pretty cover too, so we love to see it. Another one that I'm really excited for is This Dark Descent, which is another YA queer fantasy, and it's written by the same author of the Storm Crow duology, which I absolutely loved. I don't remember anything about the synopsis of this book, if I'm being honest, except that I think it's queer. I know it's inspired by Jewish folklore. I know there's a horse race. That's about it. I think it's marketed as like Peaky Blinders meets the Scorpio races, which means nothing to me, actually. But yeah, there's that. I'm so excited to read that book. Another one I have is Eli Over Easy, which is a middle-grade queer contemporary written by the same author of Small Town Pride, which I absolutely loved last year. It was one of my almost favorites, so I trust Phil Stamper a lot. I'm so excited to read this book. I think he writes middle grade better than he writes YA. So yeah, I think that book comes out in October, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, those are the top most anticipated releases for the second half of the year. I think Divine Rivals book 2, like I said, I think comes out at the end of the year or maybe early next year. And I don't remember when Heartstopper Volume 5 comes out because the release date changed recently. So yeah, I would say that those are my answers, basically. The next question is, what's the most beautiful book you own? I don't own any books. So moving on. The 8th question is, what genre have you read the most? I think I mentioned this recently, but contemporary has become my most read genre recently, which really says a lot because I think that it used to be fantasy, but now contemporary is just easier to read and it's easier to digest and understand for the most part, so that tracks. The next question is, have your reading taste changed or shifted this year? I mean, kind of. I've read more contemporary this year than fantasy or historical fiction, which is a surprise to me, like I mentioned earlier. So I would say that's it, because for me, like, I don't try new things often. So for my reading taste to change, like, they don't change drastically, if that makes any sense. They change over time, and over time I don't notice necessarily, if that makes any sense. Like, I notice, but like in retrospect only. I don't know if that makes any sense. Anyway, the next question is, if you set any bookish goals this year, how are they going? I didn't specifically set a numerical reading goal because I don't set numerical reading goals anymore. So I don't remember what specifically my reading goals I set at the beginning of the year were, except to continue to read more diversely, which I think I have done. So yeah, there's that. The next question is, what book format have you been reading the most this year? Ebooks, naturally. The last question is, what's a book that you've read this year that embodies the vibe of your reading year? So for this one, I would say Skating on Mars, which is a book that I read, I don't remember when, in May? I can't remember. But anyway, basically, this is a book that I had really high expectations for, but it ended up being like not as good as I was expecting, which encompasses my reading yield, because I had really high expectations for this reading yield because I kept comparing this reading yield throughout the entire year to last year, and last year was amazing. Like, I read 450 books. That's insane. I shouldn't say insane. Insane is a word that has ableist undertones to it, and just because I'm disabled doesn't mean that I have a past to be ableist. Anyway, it was really bizarre. That's a word I should use. It was really bizarre that I read 450 books last year. That is a colossal amount, even for me. So, with that said, with Skating on Mars, that book disappointed me because I kept comparing it to Anna on the Edge, which is the book that I read in 2020, which was absolutely so amazing and so good. But with that, Skating on Mars wasn't as good as I was expecting it to be, because when I was reading it, I kept comparing it to the previous book that I had loved, and in the same vein, I kept comparing this reading year to last year's reading year, which was absolutely so amazing. But the thing that I have to realize is that, like, the point that I am now, in the middle of 2023, is very similar to the middle of where I was in 2022, and the bulk of my reading year in 2022, like, the majority of those books that I read, of the 450, I read in the second half of the year. So I could possibly replicate that this year in the second half of this year too, if that makes any sense. So yeah, there's that. That's the end of, what's this video called? The mid-year reading check-in book tag. There's that. I tag you if you want to participate. If you enjoy this video, please don't hesitate to give it a big thumbs up. Comment down below the blue heart emoji if you made it all the way to the end of the video. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel if you're new. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye!